The bottle on your counter says maple. It has a cabin on it, and maybe a tree with a bucket hanging from it. And it costs $4 for the same size jug that pure maple syrup sells for closer to 20. The first ingredient inside that $4 bottle is not maple anything. It is corn syrup. And the second ingredient, more often than not, is high fructose corn syrup. There is a number connected to real maple syrup that most people never hear, and it is 40. I will tell you exactly what that number means, but not yet. And before we are done, I am going to give you a 3-second check you can do on any bottle in your own kitchen that tells you instantly whether what you are pouring came from a tree or from a cornfield. Do you check what comes after the words natural and artificial flavour? Or do you trust the picture of the cabin on the front and move on? Sit with that question for a second, because the label laws in this country were written to let you keep trusting the picture. Where I grew up, we did not have a name for food like this. We just would not have called it food. My grandmother kept a rule for the cellar. If she could not say what was in it, it did not go on the shelf. Cellulose gum would not have made it past her door, and neither would sodium hexametaphosphate. And I promise you she never once needed either of those words to know good syrup from bad. She judged a jar by whether she had stood over the stove that made it. That is where it gets worse, because the companies making that $4 bottle are not hiding what is in it. They are just betting you will never turn the bottle around to look. Here is what the label calls it, plainly, when a company is required to be honest about what is inside. Pancake syrup, or table syrup. Never maple syrup, because in most cases, there is no real maple in it at all. That is the fact. The plain conclusion is that the cabin on the front and the actual contents of the bottle are two entirely separate stories being told to you at the same time. And the judgment is simple. This is not a lie, because the label does say what is inside if you read past the picture. But it is a design built to be skipped, and most of us skip it. Read the actual list on a bottle of ordinary pancake syrup, and here is roughly what you will find, word for word, from bottle after bottle on the shelf. High fructose corn syrup, water, salt, cellulose gum, caramel colour, natural and artificial flavour, sodium hexametaphosphate, sorbic acid, and sodium benzoate. Read that again. Corn syrup is cornstarch broken down by enzymes into a thick, sweet liquid. And high fructose corn syrup is that same liquid processed further, so more of its sugar converts to fructose. The whole reason it exists is that it behaves like syrup, pours like syrup, and costs a fraction of what syrup made from tree sap costs to produce. Caramel colour is there to give it that deep amber shade sap gets naturally from being boiled down over a wood fire. And cellulose gum is there to give it the thickness that boiling down real sap would otherwise provide on its own. Sodium hexametaphosphate is a stabilizer. The same class of ingredient shows up in some industrial and cleaning products for entirely different jobs, which is not an accusation of anything, only a fact about what a chemical is used for elsewhere. And it is worth knowing plainly. I have stood in 100 kitchens that were not mine, church kitchens and market stalls, and a neighbour's kitchen the size of a horse stall, and I have never once seen a woman reach for a syrup like this on purpose, back when I still lived plain. There was a stall at the Saturday market a mile from where I grew up, run by an older woman everyone just called the syrup lady, who sold small glass bottles of syrup boiled down over an open fire behind her barn. She would tell you, if you asked, exactly how many gallons of sap went into your little bottle. And she was proud of that number, the way another woman might be proud of a quilt. What that stall never had, not once in all the years I stopped there, was anything that needed a stabilizer to keep from separating on the shelf. And that absence tells you something about which of these two things was ever meant to sit in a cupboard for a year. If you are the kind of person who turns the bottle around before it goes in the cart, you already know where this is headed next. And you are exactly who I am making this for. Here is what the nutrition panel shows, plainly, on an ordinary bottle of corn syrup-based pancake syrup. 0 vitamins, 0 minerals, 0 fiber, 0 protein. That is the whole thing on that side of the label. Sugar, water, and additives dressed up to taste like something it is not. Pure maple syrup, by contrast, does carry measurable amounts of manganese, some riboflavin, and a modest amount of zinc, along with plant compounds called polyphenols that come from the tree itself, not from a processing plant. The conclusion is not that maple syrup is a health food. It is still sugar, and sugar is still sugar in the body no matter what tree or cornfield it came from. But the judgment is this. One of these two bottles is giving you a trace of something the tree grew, and the other is giving you nothing at all beyond sweetness and colour. And that is a real, measurable difference, not an opinion. My aunt kept a jar of something like this in her cupboard exactly once, brought home by an English neighbour as a kindness after my aunt had a baby and could not get to the store. It sat there for the better part of a year, unopened after the first try, thick as paste, and never once needing to be refrigerated or watched for mould. My aunt was not a woman who wasted food, and she still could not bring herself to finish that bottle. She never said why, not directly, but I think now it was because nothing that sits on a shelf for a year without changing at all, is behaving the way food is supposed to behave. There is a number I promised you at the start, and here it is. 40. It takes roughly 40 gallons of raw maple sap, boiled down slowly over hours, to make 1 single gallon of real maple syrup. That ratio is the entire reason real maple syrup costs what it costs. It is labour and fire and time compressed into a number that has nothing to do with markup and everything to do with how much water has to boil away before you are left with syrup instead of sap. An industrial pancake syrup plant works nothing like a sugar house in late winter. It runs on corn arriving by the truckload from a monoculture field, processed by enzymes into starch, then syrup, then coloured and stabilised and bottled on a line that never stops for weather or season the way sugaring does. Sugaring season, where I grew up, lasted only a handful of weeks each year, whenever the nights stayed below freezing and the days climbed just above it. That narrow window was the only time the sap would run at all. Families I knew would tap their trees, hang buckets, and boil sap for days in a shed thick with steam, watching the colour change from clear to amber as the water cooked away. There is no season on a corn syrup production line. There is no window that closes. And a food that never has to wait for anything is a food that was never really tied to a place at all. Now, I want to be fair about something, because a syrup that is honest about what it is deserves an honest hearing, not just a scolding. A $4 bottle of pancake syrup is affordable in a way real maple syrup often is not. And it sits in a pantry for a year without spoiling, which matters to a family working on a tight budget or living somewhere real maple syrup is not easy to find on a shelf. Some people, too, simply prefer that stronger, sweeter, more uniform flavour over the more complex, sometimes woodsy taste of real maple. And taste is not a moral failing. If there is nothing else redeeming to say about it beyond price and shelf life, I will say so plainly, rather than invent a virtue that is not there. But price and shelf life are real, and they matter to real households, mine included, back when every dollar had somewhere else it needed to go first. The checklist I use now, standing in an English grocery store aisle, is not complicated. I look for the word maple as the first or second ingredient, not buried somewhere in the middle behind 3 kinds of corn derivative. I look for words like maize extract or glucose fructose, doing the work that a rustic picture on the front is trying to distract me from. And I do what I call the plate test at home. A spoonful of real maple syrup left on a plate for a few minutes wipes away clean, where the corn syrup version tends to leave behind a tacky film, sticky in a way that has nothing to do with sugar content and everything to do with the stabilizers holding it together. It is not a laboratory test. It is just something my own hands have noticed, bottle after bottle, over years of paying closer attention than I probably needed to. The first time I picked up a bottle of real maple syrup in an English grocery store, after I had left, I stood there so long comparing the price to the corn syrup version next to it that the cashier eventually asked if I was lost. I was not lost. I was doing the same math my grandmother used to do at her cellar shelf without a calculator, asking whether I could say, plainly, what was inside and whether that was worth what it cost. That question has never once stopped being useful to me, in a grocery aisle or anywhere else. My grandmother's rule was never really about maple syrup. It was about being willing to look past the picture on the front of anything and ask what is actually inside it, whether that is a jar in a cellar or a bottle on a shelf lit up under fluorescent lights. The cabin on the label and the syrup lady's stall behind her barn were both trying to tell you a story about where your food came from. Only one of those stories was true. Tonight, before you make breakfast, turn the bottle around and read me the very first ingredient in the comments. One word, whatever it says. That is the whole homework. No more than that. So here is the 3-second check, the one I promised you at the start. Look at the first ingredient, just the first one, before anything else on the label. If it says maple, you are holding sap that some family spent a season boiling down. If it says anything else, corn syrup, high fructose corn syrup, sugar, water, you are holding something that took a fraction of the time, a fraction of the cost, and none of the 40 gallons it actually takes to make the real thing. Turn the bottle around before you buy it, not after.